This is Dr. Dalies in Hendersonville, North Carolina. I've been asked just recently to describe my interpretation, my version of what is the adjustment with that extra something. And if you look at BJ's volume 18, it says, then there's that adjustment, that extra something, which has become a habit. He has arrived, attained, works deliberately, and knows how to secure that which he wants day after day, one case after case, and can and does duplicate like results repeatedly. This man couldn't be sidetracked from chiropractic if you gave him the medical armamentarium. Well, what is all that means? All these, what it really means here is all the mechanical things that we have been teaching you, all the mechanical aspects, the 6 steps, the doctor-patient position, that you need to be close, or you need to, the contact point, and the tissue pull, and the roll in, and the set down, and that delivery, and the dropping down and the downward spiraling arc. How wonderful words. This has become second nature. It's no longer, it's a second thought. You know that so well that you don't think about it anymore. It's sort of like, if you ever driven a stick shift car, you learn that there's 3 pedals. There's an accelerator, there's a clutch, there's a brake in between. Well, you press the clutch and you change gears. And you accelerate and you press the clutch and you change another gear. Now, you have gotten to a different level. You need to go through a dirt road while the car is sliding sideways. And you're changing gears and you're going, the car's sliding, and you catch just the right angle of that curve, and it comes out just beautifully. You never lose any speed. Can you tell me I'm a car freak? Yes, I am. And yet, that's such a beauty to see a car dancing around the corner. You don't have to think about changing from third to second, and the clutch and the brake, and no, this has become completely second nature for you. And that's where I want you to be. That's where you need to be able to deliver that adjustment with that extra something. It's become, now you're not trying to do something for that patient. Your innate is trying to entice their innate to say, would you mind kicking in the gear, please? Thank you very much. You're trying to help innate of the patient do his or her job. In the words of Jerry Maguire in the movie, help me help you. So true, so true. So as a matter of fact, I used to work with Dr. Michael Kill for quite a few years, and Dr. Kill used to describe that moment before the adjustment. And he said, I'm in a dark room. There's nothing around me anymore. I'm no longer thinking about the children, about the CA, about the patient, about the other patient. I'm thinking about this patient, this adjustment, this atlas, this position. Everything else is completely gone. Now here's the important thing that he would say was, by the time I am setting my hands on that patient's neck, the adjustment has already been made in my mind. Now it just needs a physical application of it. Isn't that cool? I mean, if you could already think about knowing so well the x-rays next to you, you've already studied them. The readings, you determined that it was pattern. You determined that an ASR is an ASR is an ASR. And now you're thinking, I'm going to deliver that ASR and clear that reading and take the interference off of that brainstem. And you're in your mind, you have already done that by the time the patient's on that table. That's so amazing. I sometimes like to look at it from a different perspective. I have a big rock, a big boulder, and I have this cliff right on the edge, and the boulder needs to be thrown off the cliff. So my doctor-patient position, gets the boulder a little closer to the cliff. The proper contact and tissue pull, I'm now quite a bit closer. I do such a beautiful roll in. I'm so natural at it that now it's like just on the edge. I see a few little pieces of dust climbing down. And now my set down is just right, and I'm just in that ready position, and I'm relaxing. And now this thing is just teetering on the edge. And it's like all you have to do is just blow on it, and the thing goes boom, 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 boom. And now you do the same thing. You are just exactly right. And you just wait for that little moment where the patient goes from contracted to have the little moment of relaxation, and you go boom. with the most amount of force. No, just enough force with the least amount of thrust, because everything else had been set up so right. Just like I just had to blow on the boulder and the thing fell. I did everything so right and everything on my setup that all I have to do is just barely go at it. Some people call me Dr. Smoothie. Well, don't worry about the Dr. Smoothie. Everybody is a Dr. Smoothie. All you have to do is just get yourself so well prepared that later on it's so easy to do that part. And I mean, imagine this just a moment. You have to think also about this crazy awesomeness, if you will. How can it be that a little 2-ounce bone can do so good and can wreak such havoc in a patient's body and cause so much heartache and health ache? But think about it. How can it be that a little 2-ounce light switch can do so much to an entire room? Just a little something like that. And yet, if you find a little light switch at the right time, in the right way, on the right wall, and you know how to press it in the right direction, look what you can do to an entire room. Imagine that. And we have this. I see it as a tremendous honor and a tremendous responsibility to have a patient under my hands. Because of my knowledge, a patient is trusting their health to me. What an awesome responsibility. But I better be able to deliver. And so, because I always ask myself, there's always needs to be a slight sense of urgency that will entice you to try your best at that adjustment with that extra something. Is the urgency to me is, if I don't try to help this patient, if I don't try to have my innate help his or her innate, who will? Who will? That's tough, isn't it? And yet, when you know everything, then it's just, Today, I had the good fortune of be able to check Dr. Kahl's wife, Charlotte Kahl, now Charlotte Kahl Henrik, she remarried. And by the way, she was clear, so very well. And I asked her the same question. I said, Charlotte, tell me, in your words, what is the adjustment of that extra something? And she gave me that pause, the 5-second pause that you seem like it's a little bit too long. And she turns to me and goes, the patient gets well. Isn't it so simple? But yet you need to know so much to be able to simply say, the patient gets well. That's how much trust she has in this principle. That's how much trust we need to have in our abilities, in our principle, and our delivery. Thank you.
Okay, I want to take a couple of minutes and just talk about what it takes to make this adjustment. And when I say by what it takes, I'm talking about what's going on inside of me, where I'm at, and really if you will, my philosophical take on this artful procedure, if you will. So the first thing I would talk about is mindset. Mindset to me, is the most essential element. If you do not have your mindset right, you're not going to be able to make effective adjustment. I don't really care how good you are technically. And it's really something because BJ talked about even as early as 1933 December when he released Subluxation Specific, Adjustment Specific. He talked about the fact that you had to have the right place at the right time and the right methods and all these things. But he also said with the right intention. And I have to tell you, once you get to the level of you're beyond, you already know how to do technically what to do. You know how to stand, you know how to do your tissue pull, you know how to do all these, and you get these elements right. The next thing that is essential, and let me just say, the most important thing at that point is mindset. You know, I heard a number of years ago about an East German team that was gymnastics, and they hooked them up to EEGs. And before they did their routines, and so on and so forth, right before they did their routines, and they measured brain waves, brain activity prior to them doing the balance beam. And what they found was those who competed and actually scored the highest, you know, got close to 10s or 9 point whatevers, these folks were the folks that had relatively little brainwave activity going through before they started their exercise, because they were beyond the fact that when I turn this way I need to do this, when I turn that way I need to do that, and they were just flowing in it. And when you flow, things work. And I'm a sports guy, so I know when I'm playing basketball and I shoot the ball, or I'm putting a putt, or some kind of sports activity, there's a certain thing that comes over me when I'm making a shot, a knowingness, like I'm going to make this shot, I'm going to make this putt. I don't always get that, obviously, but when I get that, I am most generally correct, that I am going to make that basket, I am going to make that putt. Same thing happens. We have to work our way around when we do this adjustment to make sure that we're in tune and that we are flowing with this process of the adjustment. So mindset is, I think, a paramount once you learn your technical skills. You know, it's funny, Dr. Kell used to have us do this exercise. We had this, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but these little foam things where you stick flowers in. You stick these little flowers in, you can have a bouquet, or not a bouquet, but you have different arrangements with that. But what he would do is he'd get nails, big nails, and he'd slightly put them in there. And then he'd have us get over them and do this and see how we drove that nail in. And it was so funny because if you drove the nail in crooked, Dr. Kell would say, wrong mindset. And so just very interesting, fond remembering back to that. And I also remember Dr. Kell talking about when he started to go in to make that adjustment, it was like he was entering an empty room. Now, obviously, he was doing this in his mind. He was, in other words, everything was shut down. He wasn't thinking about the electric bill. He wasn't thinking about, is this person, is a new patient coming in, or what did my CA just say to me that I didn't like, or I did like, or, whatever. He wasn't, he said he got to the place that when he made the adjustment, there was nothing else going on. And if you will, let me put it this way, we are truly a vessel. We are a vessel. And this vessel, we're a tool, a vessel that needs to be used, a conduit, if you will, that entices innate to actually make the set and the adjustment. So the mindset is the most important thing I'm going to say. Now, because I love brain physiology, and when you talk very long, you always hear something about brain physiology, let's look at it this way. Your reticular activating system lies at the base of the brain, in the brainstem, particularly in the midbrain. It is actually what releases glutamate that goes into the brain and literally turns on the brain. It goes to the thalamus and actually to the whole brain, but the thalamus gates it and turns on the whole brain. So it really is true that there's a switch in that brainstem that turns on the brain. Once the brain gets turned on, then it turns on the body. That's the basic neurophysiology. Now, the RAS also does something else. It actually gets environmental cues from our senses, whether that's touch or taste or sight or whatever that may be, whatever the sense is. It will gather that information in, and it will determine what's important, what's not important. What's not important just gets erased. We have millions and millions and who knows, maybe billions of bits of information coming into our brains, into our awareness, or not awareness, but into our place every second. Billions of bits of information, but only a few of them relatively will go from the RAS to the thalamus, and then thalamus is going to send it wherever it needs to go. Now, the reticular activating system actually, when it comes to the adjustment, it actually works in a little deeper way, and it does it this way, that when you have the right mindset to make this adjustment, and you're in that place, like I said, everything's just right here, that RAS, reticular activating system actually works in your benefit to give you clues, environmental clues, to show you the exact direction, what to do, how to do. And there's no difference when you're standing over that patient. When you're standing over that patient and you're rolled in and you're dialed in, you're just like this. You know, let me just make a kind of a funny about this, but just to illustrate my point. Who knows how many times I and other people, not just me, but how many times I've been set up over a patient, I'm getting ready to do the adjustment, and we say innate, and that's a good way to say it, but I'm going to talk brain physiology. How many times have I been rolled in, and my reticular activating system sends a message to my thalamus, and it goes to my frontal lobe, and it says, turn just a little bit. You make that turn, you make that adjustment, and everything works out perfect. Because innate knows, and innate is using the reticular activating system to be able to gauge where you're at in space and time. It's able to gauge where you're at in relationship with that patient. And when we do this adjustment, it's not just simply me doing this mechanical procedure, but this is a process that's going on between two people that need to be in sync, that needs to be working together. And so the more clear or the better we have that communication between that patient and me, or as BJ used to say, the innate of that patient and my innate, or the innate that is running, controlling me, then we have this nice fluid thing that can happen, and now my brain can pick up all the external and internal cues, if you will, because you also have the nucleus tractus solitarius that also gets our internal cues. We get our internal cues to get us in the right place, right time. Now that doesn't, I'm talking about, once you're at the level that you've technically mastered, and you can be a technical master of this adjustment and not be a master of this adjustment. So this mindset, I'm going to say, is very important. Let me talk a little bit about the technical aspect. I'm going to talk a later video on technical aspect, but I'm going to say just one thing about it. In broad, general, sweeping terms, as a technical aspect, when you look at the adjustment, you go through 4 phases. First, you're what's called an unconscious incompetent. And I apologize if you're brand new. I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings, but that's just the way it goes. You're unconscious because you don't know what you're not competent in. So you're unconscious and you're incompetent. Then you get in there, you learn, you watch the videos in 6 steps. You get the doctor positioning, you get the contact, you get the tissue pull, you get the roll in, you get the set down, you get the body drop, you get these concepts down. Then you start becoming what's called a conscious incompetent. And what that means is you know what to do, but you know you're not doing it because it takes time. Brain physiology, it takes time for that prefrontal cortex to learn how to package that specific muscular movement to coordinate and make all these things happen right. Training. So then the next level happens, you transform, and now you are actually consciously competent, which what that means is as long as I'm thinking about it and as long as I do everything just right, I can be technically competent. That's not mastery, but that's technically competent. Then the next level is where we all need to be if we're going to make that adjustment, the extra something, and that is to become that unconscious competent. In other words, you're competent without even thinking about it. You're technically competent without even thinking about it. Now, this is where we turn the dials a little bit and make sure that we're tuned in and we're listening. And by the way, if you're standing over a patient and you're like this and trying to listen, you're not listening. You've got education in the way. The most important thing, once you get to that level of being an unconscious competent, is your mindset. Your mindset is really the most essential element that you can bring to the table, because when you can tell innate what you want, innate will provide. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this.
Hello, Dr. Anderson, and today we want to talk about mastering the knee, chest, upper cervical adjustment. And it seems like, through the years, when do you get to the point where you feel like, okay, this adjustment has been mastered? And I don't know that you really get there, but you do get to a point where it just becomes a habit, as Dr. B.J. Palmer talked about, and it becomes something that is such an extension of you that you don't need to really think about it anymore. You're not really concerned as much of the technique, but you're always trying to continue to refine and develop and make sure you're still checking. At times you're taking videos, but on a day-to-day basis you're not checking yourself, like, was I standing right, or did I get the set down? You're at the point where it kind of gets to just part of who you are and what you do. And some of you, many of you, have different things that you've developed to the point you no longer have to think about the technique of it all. And for 25 years, I competed in powerlifting. And in that, myself and my brother, Dr. Patrick, we would videotape every single workout. And there's a time when I could squat over 800 pounds, but we would still, when we were doing 135 or 225 pounds, we would still videotape every single set and just try and watch and see, like, what exactly is happening. And most of it, it's just repetition. We're doing the same exact thing because we've done it for 15, 18, 20 years. And it wasn't something that needed much alteration. But it is important to always kind of check, because you can slip from any point where you're at. But I think one of the things that when I first started adjusting, and you read the types of adjustment, the 5 types of adjustment that B.J. Palmer talks about, and I went through all 5 stages. I think everybody, might do that. Some people might skip the KISS adjustment, but usually when you get started, it's a very light adjustment because you're worried and you're concerned and you don't really know how much force to deliver. But I think I stayed in the shove and push for probably the longest period of time. And I remember I was very fortunate with Dr. Kale to be able to go on the mission field with Dr. Michael Kale, to be able to be out at his house, the castle, sit one-on-one at times and talk through some things. He would just, on the mission field, he'd say, "You're using your arms too much," or you're shoving it, you're pushing. And of course at that time I was nearly 300 pounds of body weight, I was a power lifter. And he's like, "It's just a few ounces of bone. It's enticement of innate." And he's teaching me, and really probably the best way you can learn from Dr. Kale is in that one-on-one setting, because he could really find a way to then impart specifically to you. He didn't oftentimes have set procedures on how he taught something, but it was when you sat down and talked to him, you were talking to a master, and just gold nuggets of information would come forth. And I remember on the mission field, he'd get so frustrated with me, and he'd say, "You go sit, you go scan, you're on post for a while." He'd make me just go and check people, because he's like, "You got to stop, get off people's necks for a little while." And that actually, kind of hurt at the time, but it was really beneficial, as you're sitting there on post, to just realize that, what the opportunity we have with people's health. And the one thing the world doesn't really understand is that brain stem, the seat of the autonomic nervous system, what Dr. Kale called Houston control. I mean, we're applying our hands to make a correction to an area that is so vital and that can change people's lives. And I've had times where really literally people's health, their life, from a serious standpoint, like if something's not done now, things will get very bad to the point of maybe possibly even death. And so it's time to step up and know, as Dr. Kale would say, Dr. B.J. Palmer, know that you know that you know. And that from the time that you've put in to learn everything, at this point, when you're standing over someone whose life is starting to hang in the balance, you're not having to think about, okay, I better make sure I get the set down. I better make sure it's just time to deliver at that point. What he would do, and this was so awesome, he would have me set up on a person, and then he'd put his hands over top of mine, and he would make the adjustment right through my hands. And he said, now that's how it feels. And it was wild because it was so fast, but so light, but you feel such a power in there with the adjustment. And it was very helpful, although it was really like, you know, you're trying to learn how to play basketball and you're trying to shoot, and someone like Steph Curry or Larry Bird or some of the best shooters in the history of the game, they go and shoot a bunch of shots and say, just do it like this. Well, there's a lot of technique and a lot of help to that, but you're so far from their position, and I was so far from Dr. Kale's position at that time that it was hard to even imagine, how am I going to be able to adjust like that? But the wild thing is, through the years, you know, you kind of look back, and look back where that's at. I have from your volume 18. It's in page, and you should get this. It starts on page 425 and 426, and there's the 5 types of adjustments. And I'd go through and I'd see, and I was like, well, at least you know, I'm in between a shove and a push and an adjustment. And as time was move on, I'd look back and read through that, and it will tell you something like the adjustment. It talks about a light, quick adjustment, concussion of force, letting innate absorb recoil in retaliation, knowing that innate will adjust. And this is like, when you read this, you're like, wow, that's a great adjustment. And at the end, he talks about, it says, the chiropractor is constantly and severely checking himself. And this is a point where we want to check ourselves at times, because anybody can slip. But what happens is this bit of doubt is in there. It's like, I made a lot of good adjustments, but was that one good? Or when the time comes to the even more urgent, you know, the person has a very significant problem, and this adjustment better be right this second, then that time, second guessing needs to be out. And there's this, I came across this awesome quote, and it was just, you know, it's one of these on the internet. You can find just about anything, and sometimes it's not, they didn't even give the person's name, so it should have great credit to it because it's really good. What it says, master your skills to the point that you don't even need confidence. And when I first read that, I was like, that something doesn't sound right for a second on that. And then when I thought about it, that's exactly right. Is that a lot of times we feel like we need confidence to help us to perform better at a higher level. But really, this, and the last one, this adjustment with the extra something, and this becomes this mastering point. It's a time when it really is just a part of you, and just something like, when you reach out your hand to shake someone else's hand, you don't have to think about how to do that. You know, it just happens through there, and it's a very simple procedure. The adjustment is a lot more complex, obviously, and you're dealing with different people and different necks and different resistance to the adjustment, and a lot of different factors. But it needs to be to the point where the adjustment is just made, and it's really just another extension of you, and you're not having to have confidence because you just already know. And you can't force that. It's something that comes, but it comes over putting in the time to train and get the 6 steps. Am I standing in the right place? Is the patient in the right place? And and how's my contact, my tissue pull, and the roll in, and of course the set down. And as time goes on, and Dr. Kale talked about how for him he'd walk into a dark room, and then when everything's out and there's no more sounds or noise or light or whatever, then the adjustment happens in an instant. And so I think everybody eventually, you may not even know this, but you kind of get a trigger. I know that I do, and I didn't know what it was until analyzing it and years later seeing. But what happens for me, there can be noise around, and I can be even talking to the person or talking to someone else as I'm rolling in or getting them to drop their shoulder or move their knees back. But what happens is when I go through, when I set down, and it's that last set down, and that's why, as it developed through, and Dr. Kester brought through the set down, this is the secret sauce. I just love that, because what happens is that became my trigger. And so what happens is, as soon as I set down, everything else kind of just goes blank. It probably, hopefully, if you could brainwave me, it would just be like not a thought going in, and then adjustments. The very split second after that, it's like it's too late. Then I've jumped in the pool. I'm in the air. I'm getting wet. There's no turning back now. So once the set downs happened, then everything else clears, and it really just, there's that last trigger. I remember in powerlifting, you'd get up to the bar and be, especially in like a nationals or a world competition, so many people out there and people yelling and people are loud at a powerlifting competition. And so they're yelling and come on, and you can do it, all this stuff, and they're going. And I'd go out there, and I love to just, grip and twist the bar and just have the feeling of it. And I'd almost take a look at the bar and like, okay, you're going for a ride today. I was like, okay, it's me versus you. And, hey, the bar's got no feelings, but to me, this was my enemy. There would be a thing, I could still hear everybody going. My brother's telling me some things, to make sure I keep right while I'm going. And all those things are happening. But then what I'd do is I'd crank the bar, and I would let out just like, and it wasn't even usually a word or anything, but just a loud release of pressure. And when I do it, I duck underneath the bar. But at that point, it was like my trigger. And at that point, everything went blank. And at that point, I really couldn't hear this. All the people are still yelling. It's all out. It's like you just muted it. And then, I start to go and set up my feet. And the judge says to squat, but I wouldn't even really remember that. I'm almost going on my own timing at that point. And I do the lift, and if the lift is real easy and fast, then it's not till you get to the top. If it's slow, half the way up when you're fighting it, then the audio comes back on. And until you've been in that, it's kind of a different thing. And I can understand when a professional athlete is like, I was in this zone, and they just like, I just threw the ball up and it went in. I just swung the bat and it went over. Reggie Jackson, this was years ago, hits 3 pitches, 3 home runs, right? To throw the pitch, boom, home run. It's 3 times in a row. And you get to this point where there is nothing else. And so I'm not thinking about, I need to stay tight, I need to push hard, I need to do this. It's all gone at that point. Everything that I've done up to that point. But it's all the preparation prior to that then gets to a point where it becomes a habit. And so what BJ talks about, the adjustment with the extra something, which has become a habit. It says it right there on 428. He's arrived, attained, works deliberately, and he knows how to secure that which he wants day after day, case after case, and does duplicate like results repeatedly. That's the point between this other, where it's a very good adjustment, and you're understanding the enticement and the like, and you've got down the position, your arm position is good, and you've got all that down. But there's this extra stage where it's become this habit. And that's one of the things, as we're walking through this, that you start to feel like, hey, I'm moving from this technician to an artist. I'm moving from this person who's doing and it's so much like cooking. I'm not even a good cook, but you can understand principles. I'm the cook that does I'm going to read it, and if they tell me a cup of this and a tablespoon of that, I'll just read it and do it, and then that's the food. How it comes out. You put it in 300 degrees for 15 minutes, whatever it is. But there's then the chefs that are artists, and yeah, they know all the rules, but they've got to a point where it's like, well, what'd you just do there? I don't know. I just did it, the way I need to do it. And then it comes out and you're like, well, I did the recipe and he did it. But this meal is amazing and mine is, maybe edible. This is the difference through all types of forms of a physical, technical type act. And an adjustment, when you're dealing with innate intelligence, you're dealing with your desires and the patient's and their health. There's a living dynamic that's just amazing here. What it is, you're dealing with a person in a part up here at the brainstem, and whether they fully know it yet because they're a new patient or whatever, this is the area where life and death. This is when this area shuts off, you are shut off. And when it's still going, you're still going. No matter if you're hanging on, if you just like, well, this person is brain dead. But if the brain stem's still going, they're still alive. And so it's a very high responsibility. The world doesn't know this. They don't, like, if you make a bad adjustment, this isn't like if somebody messes up a surgery. Then they go in front of the courts and everybody knows he did the wrong thing. But they don't understand the value. But you do. And it's important for us to then carry that mantle and that responsibility, knowing. And Dr. Kessinger, I just love this, he'd call it bloodless brainstem surgery. And this is what we're dealing with, is a very significant procedure that's happening at that time. So whether a patient knows it or not, at that point, they understand kind of what they're surrendering, and they're counting on you to do a life-saving procedure. Even though they might not be, ready to die in the next week or day or month or whatever, but they're counting on you, and the procedure that you do that opens this area up and allows their body to go from dis-ease to ease and start working properly, that is really causing them, their life and their health to come back. And I remember one of the most powerful things in my practice that really, it was probably more philosophically sound than I was at the point. And I explained that it's kind of, this is where I had to make contrast between what I thought I knew. But BJ says, and I love Dr. Kelly used to always repeat this, he said, I have no way of knowing what you don't know until you know it. Then you must make contrast between what you thought you knew and now know that you did not know it then, because you know it now. And so just let that sit and get into that, because it's an awesome phrase. But he said that's one sentence out of 40 volumes of books. So there's a lot to read in the Green Books. What happened was, this is probably at least 10 years ago. And at that point, I would have thought, I understand this chiropractic principle and practice, and I'm fully immersed in it. And I was all the way, I'm into chiropractic, and at the time it's into me. I've been through a lot of different wars and battles at that point. But this lady came in, and her and her husband had been coming in. This older lady, probably about 68 years old, 67. Her and her husband had been coming in for about a year and a half. And, you know, just by the things she said, she kind of caught it right off the bat, but not to the level that I thought. And what happened was, very tragic event, her husband was whitewater rafting with their adopted son. So they had a younger son, about 15 years old, and hit some rocks. He went over, and he ended up keeping the son in the boat to where the son wouldn't drown. But in doing that, it put him in a position where he could not get back in the boat, and unfortunately, he drowned. And it was, you just can't imagine. I can't imagine that with the spouse and what she was going through. And the morning they were going to have the funeral, and I was seeing patients, and I'm like, okay, I need to get to the funeral. Well, this is probably about an hour or so before the funeral, and this lady whose husband passed away, she came in, and I was like, Judy, I'm so sorry, and we hugged, and I said, the funeral is in a little bit. And she said, I know. She said, I have to be checked. I just have to know that this is clear and that I'm okay to go through this. And I mean, even now, it just blows me away. And at the time, I thought I understood this thing. And then that just like moved me up to this place where I was like, wow, this is where some of my patients, this is where it sits for them. And I was like, okay, let's get you checked. And it just, when you start understanding the power that's underneath your hands, then the importance of developing to that point to be able to deliver it. And now, after more than 20 years, I've had opportunity, and they're not opportunities I relish, but where a person is, their things are severe enough, yes, they could die. I had an incident where when my son was 2.5 years old, he was pulling on drawers of file cabinets in the clinic. I mean, these are 400-pound cabinets, and the drawers caused the other drawers to move, and the whole entire thing fell on top of him and crushed him to the ground. And my wife, in one of these scenarios that you hear about where someone does something way more than they could, she flicked the thing off him. It weighed at least 500 pounds. And he wasn't breathing. He was just like this. There was not even any crying because there's no oxygen. She brought him. I heard this loud noise, and I came running to the front, and in an instant I kind of knew what happened, but I didn't, it's just one of those things where you almost perceive it. And she brings him to the back, and I did check him. But it was so far off. It was 1, 2, 3. It kept getting so. It was at least 3 degrees off from one side to the other. I checked him, and so that was something that even in that situation we're going to check. But of course, he needed to be adjusted. And at that time, it's all happened instantly. But everything that has prepared to that point, and this again, it's like 12 years ago. Everything that's prepared to that point has got me to when that scenario happens, there's no worry about it. I knew that if we could get him adjusted, then that would be it. And when I adjusted him, he started crying, so he's breathing again. And I just know that had he just we didn't know the chiropractic principle, that he go to the hospital, and this could be one, they put him on a breathing machine, they're not correcting this area, and so the breathing centers may not come back. And it may be one where he stays that way for a while and say, well, there's nothing that can be done. We just would have to pull him off this life support. And instead, the breathing comes back, and it took him like 2 or 3 months to recover, where he didn't have pain anymore. But his body healed and his body recovered. And I've had a number of times like that, where I just know, at that instant you're able to deliver the adjustment. And one of my favorite parts in here, and because there's a part where in this volume 18 where it's just called the adjustment chapter, and I remember this before we had the 6 steps and everything. If stuff fell off, I would go back and read this adjusting chapter, and it'd talk about the set down. It would talk about different things, and it would help get me back on track. And so it's so valuable to really try and take some of these tools and to rewatch the 6-step videos and just video yourself and see where you're on, where you're off. And these are times to severely check yourself, because you're going to have times where you're going to be called upon to be able to deliver that adjustment with the extra something. And you don't want to just hope that it's going to happen. And you want to be at that point where you know it. And in Volume 18, BJ talks about the single most important part of chiropractic is the adjustment, but it's the weakest link in our profession. It's just vital for us. We do need to know how to read x-rays. We definitely need to know how to run the pattern analysis. We need to know how to engage and teach this above, down, inside, out principle to our patients. But all of it goes out the window if you can't make an adjustment at the right place in the right time in the right direction, and then actually that will have staying put value and get the patient well. And it's something that if we just spend our time and be diligent with it, we can get to that point. There's one last thing I just want to go through here. Volume 25, again, is one of my favorites. It's clinical control research. And so this is from the research from Dr. B.J. Palmer. And in here there's 8 cases that show different cases and how he managed them with the adjustment and with the running the instrument. But he talks about, and he goes through chiropractor must exactly know where vital and only subluxation is. He must not guess, presume, hope. And he goes through this whole paragraph. He keeps talking, guess, presume, hope. Don't guess, presume, hope. Don't guess, presume, hope. He keeps saying the same thing. But he goes through, if it requires one adjustment to get case well, that adjustment must have been given perfectly. Then this is the whole take home as he goes through all these things of, you're past guessing, hoping, presuming. So when the chiropractor reaches that stage of human development where he can duplicate his work, he is a chiropractor worthy of the chiropractic principle and practice. And if you love this and the chiropractic principle and the above, down, inside, out, as much as I do, and now after 24 years, it's no less than it was the day one. And when I first met Dr. Kessinger and he told me about B.J. Palmer, and I was like, whoa, I get all fired up, and it was like, this is amazing principle. And it just, I stayed up nights. Well, I still stay up nights. And I love to just talk about it, and I love to get into the philosophy of it, because to me it's really one of the most worthy endeavors in the entire world, and something that you can do and provide for your fellow man. And it's important for us to reach that stage where we can do that, because people need us and there's no one else. It's a small group of people. And so I'm excited about you learning this and developing it to that point. And I appreciate every one of you. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to more and more people developing this to the point of mastery, where whenever we send someone out or send a relative or whatever, I know this person, he, she is one of the best. And I gotta take one. There's no getting checked today, but I've held my adjustment for the last almost 2 years till recently. Dr. Kester adjusted me, so I'm counting on. The longest I've ever held was 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, knowing that Dr. Kessinger has the adjustment with the extra something, that I got about 5 years. So I had a sip of coffee there, not worried about the reading, planning on this adjustment, holding for a good 5 years. And I just appreciate all you guys, and I thank you for your time, and just let's go ahead and do this thing.